All right. I think we're going live probably right now. Just about. And I want to make sure that I am properly set up here. I don't know if anyone's really going to come in and hang out. But I have the chat on my side. And I think I'm ready to go. I have this already kind of set up. I'm just going to, because I'm doing this in my own little way. Oh, look. DeSaul in the post-credit, DeSaul X post-credit scene. Yeah, that's something we're going to talk about for sure in this this video. But with all that being said, I just want to move that down just a little bit because I feel like, give me a little second here. I haven't done a live stream in so long and I don't want to do this improperly. I have an entire thing set up, but I need to understand my whole concept. So I have like 2 current viewers. That's totally fine. I am not entirely anticipating everyone showing up at this point. For the people in the chat, Adam Stanley and well, tell me if I'm for the people in the chat. Tell me if I'm sounding good. I have honestly no way of checking, and I've tried all day to kind of set this up in the right way possible, but I don't want to be blowing out my speaker or making it sound like it's just absolutely terrible. So anyway, what's up, guys? We're going to be talking, kind of like back it up because, again, this is just really off the cuff. It is a late night stream. But just to kind of put this into perspective, I have been thinking a lot about this channel, trying to do the best I can with it and actually utilize it instead of just letting it linger for months on end with not even talking about the Saul franchise, American Horror Story, or literally anything in relation to, you know, cinematic offerings, content, things that are out there. And one of the things I thought I could do in order to pick up the upload output is to simply just think about the stuff I want to talk about, do live streams, cut it up, and put them on the video chat. So maybe I can get, hopefully, maybe 2 or 3 video uploads a week on this channel as I continue to focus on KRW Network and do scripted content over there. This is just kind of me talking off the cuff and just doing the best I can. Also, thank you for the confirmation that I sound okay, because I'm just seeing all this stuff pop up on me and I was just like, oh my gosh, it feels like I am blowing out these speakers, even though I'm not even talking that harshly. So anyway, so that's kind of what I want to do with Real Talk going forward, is do live streams like this that have very distinct talking points that I can then take, cut up into regular video uploads for the people who don't get to see the live streams, kind of cutting out all of the fluff that really helps to condense the point, put it out there. Hopefully people can talk about it not only in the live stream, but also in the comment section. Because I like the interaction, I like the communication, definitely something I want to hear from y'all. So as we go through these topics, you know, at late night stream, a pretty niche topic even for this channel, and its viewer base and the fact that I haven't been here for a long time. Obviously not a lot of people are going to be in this stream. I don't even know if anybody's going to be in this stream throughout the entire thing, but I wanted to do my best to get all of the content out there and talk about everything in relation to Saul 10. This is why I thought Saul 10 was such a great idea to cover at the very beginning, because 1, it's new, I know a lot about it, and there's so many things to talk about. Like you saw in the title, we're going to do a brief overview review of this, and then we're going to move into box office take, what I expect for it to make, how profitable it needs to be in order to guarantee a sequel, and then we're going to move into ideas that we have for sequels. And I would love to hear all your thoughts and opinions on all of this as we go through this, especially after I get done with everything. Then we can hyper focus on some of the more conversational aspects that we can get within a stream. With that being said, I wanted to... Yes, yeah, and exactly, we are talking spoilers. Thank you. I don't want to I don't want to leave that out because, again, we're going to be talking about everything that happens in Saw 10. Everything that happens in the previous 9 movies is literally up for grabs based on what we're going to be talking about, and just wanted to make sure all of that is copacetic. With that being said, let's jump right into it. I'm trying to keep up, by the way, because this is just literally my first time doing this, trying to figure out how to make this appeal for me and help me keep up with everything. I am doing my best to keep up with the chat, so please, literally just try to work with me on this. So Saul needs this win after the box office failure of Jigsaw and Spiral. I was worried if the movie failed, the franchise would be put to rest. Okay, so yes, we're going to talk about that. Just give me 1 second. Anyway, so first and foremost, I wanted to talk a little bit about the Saw franchise and Saw 10 specifically in a bit of a review form. I want to talk about the good, the bad, some of the ugly about this movie, and how I think it compares to the rest of the franchise. Starting with the good, I think we have to be very clear that Saw 10 is, for better or worse, a sequel that was made to look like it was released in 2004 through 2009. It has the tonal structure, it has the filters, it has the editing style, and it has pretty much the same story down to, or pretty much the same, it has pretty much the same feel to it as one of those early 2000 or mid 2004, one of those mid 2000 sequels from the Saw franchise, even down to the Lionsgate gear logo, which I think was a really nice touch, something that they really didn't have to do, but it was one of the ways of winking to the fans that this is exactly what we've been waiting for ever since the end of the franchise back in 2010, with the rebirth of Jigsaw and Spiral not really included, because that franchise, or those franchise reboots, didn't really give people what they really wanted. Not that they weren't major successes in their own right, but again, we're going to have to get to that later. I really appreciated the fact that the Saw franchise took part in this and just really went to town by showcasing these aspects of the franchise that we don't necessarily get to see on a day-to-day basis. The idea of a no cop related procedural for the Jigsaw, or for Jigsaw's team, any type of Saw franchise film. This was the very first film in the entire franchise where there was absolutely no cop element. I love that. It's something that I've been talking about and wanting for so very long, because every single one, barring Saw 3, but that's not necessarily a great example, because we do get some cop elements after the opening trap, and Eric Matthews being a prominent character in flashbacks in that movie. It's arguable that because it takes place during the same time period as Saw 4, that they were integrated into that story and very important through everything throughout. It's just that specific part of the story, or at least the vast majority of that film, didn't necessarily have anything to do with cops. But they were there, they were looking, and there was opposite games with cops throughout that entire film. Saw 10 bucks that trend, focuses entirely on the traps themselves, with John Kramer at the helm and Amanda Young by his side. This is something that it's hard to imagine that character, or well, let me take a moment, because I want to be able to toggle. Yeah, this will help a lot. So I'll be able to see your comments as I'm actually talking. So So as I was saying, the way that we don't have cops in this movie, I think, is a real benefit to its overall story, because it allows the story to slow down in necessary parts, focusing entirely on John for like the first 20 to 25 minutes of the movie. And then during the traps, we're focusing a little bit more on Amanda and John's relationship, and how Amanda feels a little less confident in the fact that she's going to have to take over the games and John's legacy after he's gone. And because of this failed procedure and everything kind of leading up to the vendetta that John has against Cecilia and everybody in Mexico, that's going to happen sooner rather than later. He's not technically healed for any one way or the other. And I think that that's something, personally, I think that's one of the reasons why everyone likes this movie, obviously, just because we're focusing on these characters, and it finally takes the leap of faith to decide that John is the protagonist of the films, which is common for most horror franchises, especially if you get to 10 films. Nobody necessarily cares that John or Jason, Freddy, or any of these other people are killing people every given film that they're in. We come to see them because they're the ones that are engaging. It's not the fodder for the traps or the slasher kills or anybody else like that. Besides maybe, I don't know, like Nancy, Tommy Jarvis, Sydney from the Scream franchise, and all of those. But that is Laurie Strode, obviously. But I think those are really ingrained within those franchises, and those are the main characters throughout, and they carry over to multiple films. The Saw franchise doesn't really have that. We can talk about that in future discussions and live streams. I would really love to get y'all's perspective on this, but the Saw franchise could have had that, but we haven't ever really had that, so we have to hyper focus on John, Amanda, Hoffman. A lot of people focus on Dr. Gordon. There is a lot of people, especially in chat, who think that Adam Stanheidt is not only not dead, but has been helping for the longest time, and they want to see him for Saw 11. I'm not entirely sure about that. But I think the idea of focusing on these characters and creating a narrative that we're hyper-focusing on the killers of the franchise, their journeys, their emotional arcs throughout like the first 10 films or 11, 12 films of this franchise, I think is well worth it, and one of the testaments as to this film's overall quality. It knows what the audience wants, and it obviously delivered on so many fronts for so many people, and I think that that's one of the special things about it. Anyway, again, and not just to talk about that, but I also think that this is a very good. I do think that this is a very good nostalgia bait movie. To kind of talk about that in some kind of perspective, I think a lot of people think about nostalgia bait movies. I think one of the more recent big nostalgia bait movies that kind of took the world by storm, at least in the horror world, was Scream 5 or Scream 2022. And while I certainly have my problems with that movie, I don't necessarily want to hyper focus on that. But just to say, one of the things I've really had a problem with this modern process of Scream is that they haven't done anything unique with the entire brand. They keep reiterating the same plot points that they've done multiple times before. Kind of in the same way that Scream 5 was essentially Scream 4, almost through and through. Maybe better characters, I'd give you that. Obviously more famous actresses with Jenna Ortega, but still pretty much just a carbon copy of what came before. And I would argue Scream 4 was more interesting. Maybe a lot of that is because it was a late stage Scream movie from Wes Craven, and just Wes Craven was so good at what he was doing that he was able to bring everything out in the series and make it engaging, even though as one of my biggest issues with the Scream franchise is it has very little to do with the horror franchise or horror genre in general, but it claims to, and the characters around it are trying to hyper focus on, oh, this is horror centric, this is what horror is about, this is what it is, and this is what it is. When in reality, it doesn't come across that from the general viewer. My biggest issue is the idea, just to name kind of a few things, Scream 5 hyper focuses on this is how they ruin horror franchises by having Rian Johnson come in and direct Stab 8. And that's a Star Wars reference. Everything about that movie and its killers is a Star Wars reference, not necessarily horror franchises. If you were going to do, yes, we have toxic fans too, then have someone like Jeff Foxworthy come in and direct it, because he is a washed up comedian, or just a comedian in general, who should have focused on comedy, came in, directed a bad sequel, and pissed off an entire franchise. And yes, for anybody who is thinking that I'm poking fun at Chris Rock here, I certainly am. I still very much dislike Spiral. Seen it multiple times. We're going to talk about it a little bit later, but yeah, I don't like Spiral, and I feel like that would have been a little bit better of a joke in relation to the horror movie continuity, or at least the horror movie genre that Scream seems to emulate. But with that franchise, no, it's supposed to be a big, dumb popcorn movie, and a lot of people don't hyper focus on this stuff, but they knew about what was happening with The Last Jedi and Rian Johnson and all that stuff, so they incorporated it and made it into a horror movie trope, and I honestly don't like that. That's my whole point with kind of coming back around to why I like Saw 10 in relation to nostalgia bait versus Scream 5, is because Saw 10 is a movie made for its fans that understands its fans. It's not necessarily a movie for pop culture. It's not a movie that's supposed to make $100 million domestically. In reality, the Saw franchise has never been able to keep up with the Scream franchise. They've always been on certain different levels. It's just that the Saw franchise has always cost just a lot less than what the Scream franchise has cost throughout. And they don't have to appeal to as broad of an audience, so they can hyper focus and make a movie that is exactly like this, and people gravitate towards it. And I think one of the things that we're seeing now, which we'll get to in a minute, is the box office take of Saw 10 in relation to Jigsaw and Spiral is really interesting, and I feel like says a lot about what fans want from this particular series. So that's a lot of the stuff that I liked about the movie. Obviously, Tobin Bell and Shawnee Smith are very good at what they do. Their chemistry is still on point, even though they haven't necessarily been on screen together since 2009, not that I'm aware of. And obviously, they have a lot of respect for each other. Seeing that relationship build is very important. One of the things that I was having a conversation with one commenter or somebody on Twitter the other day, and they told me that, yes, Josh and Pete arguably have had really big ups and downs when it comes to the Saw franchise and them writing the last 3 films, but they really came to play with Saw 10, and I don't think that the Spirit brothers they kind of took it as a job with Jigsaw. They didn't necessarily see it as part of the family or anything like that. This was kind of their next big stepping stone after Daybreakers and Predestination, 2 films that they put their heart, the blood, sweat, and tears into. Jigsaw was not necessarily that type of movie. At the same time, bringing back Darren Lynn Bousman for Chris Rock's pitch, and we're going to talk about that in a minute, but pitch for what ultimately became Spiral seemed like a good idea at the time, but honestly, Chris Rock, I'm not entirely sure he had much of an idea, and Darren Lynn Bousman, I think had already kind of said goodbye to the franchise. I feel like he wanted out with Saw 3. He's talked about that a lot. He came back for Saw 4 because it was kind of this bridging film. And obviously, like, he thought like he got swayed with Lionsgate because he was also making Repo the Genetic Opera at the same time. So he came back for that reason. Kevin Greuter obviously had problems because Saw 6 was kind of a financial flop. He was going to do Paranormal Activity 2 before they used the contract to bring him back for Saw 7, even though they were going to have David Hackle come in and direct the damn thing after they taught him how to use 3D and everything for that specific movie. They literally threw him out, brought Kevin Greuter back in. Immediately thereafter, he only had like 3 weeks to prep in order to make Saw 3D, Saw the Final Chapter, whatever they will end up calling it at the very end of the day. And yeah, I mean, that was a whole drama thing, but time passed, bridges got mended, even though Kevin Greuter was very adamant in his blog back in the day that he was not happy about this. I mean, he ended up deleting those posts, but if you were looking at it at the time, you know that he was not happy. He was literally saying he was going to make Saw 7 a comedy, like a musical type of comedy. It was going to be the funniest Saw film ever because like he just didn't want to direct the movie. He wanted to do Paranormal Activity, which he was already contracted to. So he came back, all of that to say that, kind of the flair of it, but all of that to say he came back in order to direct this movie. And I was talking to somebody on Twitter the other day, and they said Josh and Pete have had their ups and downs with the creative talent that they've worked with and the stories that they've had to tell. But sometimes writers and directors come together, and it's just a really nice pairing. And I think that that's really interesting and something that I think we should all hyper focus on. I like Jigsaw for what it is. I know a lot of people don't. I really don't like Spiral, and I haven't been very like eager to hold my tongue when anybody says like, oh, do you like it, or why don't you like it, and blah, blah, blah. I know it has its defenders. I find it a very disappointing movie, but I think Saw X is a very good example of what can happen when these two writers match with a director who understands the franchise and comes at it with a very passionate perspective, as well as having a cast that understands their characters, understands the roles that they're playing, and everyone comes, together in the perfect way and makes a movie like this. There's a reason why this movie is the first fresh movie on Rotten Tomatoes, and it's not even close. I mean, it's like the last time I looked, I think there's like a 34-point difference between this movie and the original movie, and that's something to kind of be proud about. This is a very good film in the franchise, and while I won't necessarily sit here right now and tell you that after my 2 viewings in the theater that it's worthy of being within the top 3, I'm still saying it's in the top 5. And for a 10th entry in a Saw, for a 10th entry in a franchise, I think that that's really worth mentioning, and it's really impressive, especially when after a couple more viewings, after I get this on home video and I listen to the commentaries and all this other stuff, it might be able to push that up there. In the same way that when I first watched Spiral and all the commentaries on Spiral, I think that actually pushed it down my list. As I was getting more interested in it, I realized that the producers, the director, and everybody didn't have any passion, or at least they didn't talk about it in the same way that people have talked on the commentaries for the movies of this franchise before, and that really kind of depressed me. Again, we'll get back into that. As for the bad, and there's still bad. I don't want to necessarily hyper focus on this film being something that is without fault, because that's not the case at all. I want to say, that Rotten Tomatoes score for Saw X was really surprising. Yeah, Cinema Clips 60. I was very surprised by that. But again, not every good thing comes without bad. So, first and foremost, while I like the placement here and bringing back John and Amanda is the best decision for an individual film, I'm not entirely sure where this leaves the franchise. I guess if this was the swan song to John Kramer and Amanda Young and it was played off as such, it would be a little more convincing. With that said, the producers have said that any legitimate continuation of the franchise going forward, John Kramer will be alive. Which means that because they're not willing to break continuity, they're not willing to do a straight up Halloween sequel type of situation, that they're going to bring him back, and it's going to be either post Saw 1 or Saw 2 or something, or it's going to be in between Saw 2 and Saw 3. Which means that this movie, while being good, really has no immediate direction. I feel like one of the biggest things that I looked forward to when it came to any continuation of the Saw franchise was that we got to see this franchise kind of build itself up into a bit of a television show, television episodes, series type event every single Halloween for multiple years, to the point where every single movie was kind of picking up where the last one left off, and that you would get to see how much more twists and turns there were. How many questions that were left unanswered were answered in this movie, and how many questions did you have going back out of that new movie into next year's film. It was something really special in 2020, like the mid 2020s, and it's something that I'm not entirely sure we're going to ever get back to. Jigsaw, I think, left a lot of really interesting questions. Who was Logan? Like, how was he connected to all of this? The ability to bring back John, Amanda, and Hoffman and all these other characters was something that I wanted to see going forward, but that movie has somewhat been abandoned. And now that we're Spiral and Saw 10, especially Saw 10's placement in the timeline, and there's no hint, at least as far as I'm aware, maybe somebody in the comments can tell me whether or not there was any indication that Logan still exists within this movie. I haven't certainly seen one in my 2 viewings, but I think we can look at Jigsaw as kind of being non-canon now, unless they try their best to incorporate that, or at least characters or events from it, into the next film. As well as Spiral is also something that they can completely forget about. And then this is something, and again, like, even if this movie is set after Saw 10 or is a direct continuation of Saw 10, you run into the risk of creating a problem where this movie was really good and a critical success because it required no immediate understanding or knowledge necessary to watch this film. You didn't have to go watch the first, the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth, and now 10th movie in order to understand anything that was going on in this movie. You didn't even have to see the first one. A direct continuation of this movie, or something that connects to any other non-popular sequel or anything of that sort, kind of undercuts what this movie was and what made it special. And I feel like any continuation they create from this will ultimately be a standalone movie, focusing more on character development. And while I like that as a fan, we are missing those twists and turns. Again, this kind of goes into one of my biggest criticisms, that the twist was not very good this time. Not that the twists have been mind-blowing in this franchise for any real stretch of time, but for anyone who's liked this series for any some odd years, or maybe you just watched all of it this summer or going into the Halloween season or something, and now you're kind of getting to become a fan of it, I feel like we can all admit that while the twists for Saw 6 aren't anything to write home about, the fact that it's fairly connected to everything that came before and how it ties back into the events of Saw 4 and everything that happened there, it's not necessarily a twist that you can understand or see coming or really intuit by the things that the film have told you, because it's all retroactive storytelling. But as a fan of the narrative, that's one of the things that made them special. It kind of rewarded people for paying attention and knowing who this person is, where that location is, and everything going on in this twisted timeline. We are no longer there. So by the time you get to the end of this movie and its twist, you know that there has to be a twist for any Saw film, but that's something that essentially just has to come and go. It's not something that surprises you to any real degree. And I feel like one of the things I've read about, or at least they've talked about, especially in the Jigsaw commentary, was, at least the producers at the time thought, one of the biggest issues was we have to kind of telegraph the twist. So the point where you're watching the movie and you know exactly what's going on and how things are playing out. Obviously, obviously everybody here is working against John and they're all in on it. Henry, all the way to Cecilia and everyone involved that he talks to in Mexico. So that's obvious from the very beginning, because we know that he was, even from the trailer, that he was duped. But they have to take some time to then explain to you, or at least try to convince you, that what you think is real isn't necessarily real, and that you have to kind of intuit and go backwards on this. And I think that's okay, but I think it's been the epitome of what this stretch of films has been: Jigsaw, Spiral, and Saw 10, where those twists aren't anything to write home about. And because there's so many dropped stories, we lose that connective thread of, well, this is important, or this is nostalgic, or this is interesting because I'm a fan, I paid attention, and I know who this character is. I know where that situation is. I know where this is in the timeline. And it all kind of interconnects and plays together. We don't have that with these films, and I honestly think, as a fan of this franchise, it's something that I miss and I feel like hurts these films from being as special as they could be. Without it, it's just a generic twist that doesn't necessarily benefit longtime fans. It's just nice to see the characters at the end of the day. Finally, I do want to talk briefly about, because I saw there was some discussion in the chat about bringing in Mark Hoffman from the Trap. Cinema Clip 60 says, seeing Mark Hoffman in the post-credit scene made me scream in the theater. I really wish they hadn't have given that away in the trailers. By the time the end of the movie is coming up, you're like, wait, what happened to the bathroom? I saw that in the trailers. And you know that it's going to be the post-credit scene, because you know that a post-credit scene is going to happen. So I wish they didn't give that away. I think it would have been way more exciting. With that being said, I don't necessarily like that whole scene, because it's way too quick. We don't know what happens to Henry, although I guess we can intuit that he dies, and we don't necessarily know what's going on with, how does this connect? If this is happening before Saw 2, then yeah, epic bad luck. Exactly. Epic bad luck which doesn't make sense with the time placement of that. I can't remember how long ago it was when people were saying epic. But I know a lot of people online have been talking about how much they hate that line, and I do too. But I like seeing Hoffman again. I loved hearing his voice. I liked the fact that they don't throw anything away. If there's one thing that scene kind of expresses in a really soft way, it's that no matter what, this franchise is always going to have its continuity. So yeah, you're not having the connectivity issues that we had before, but we're not forgetting everything. And maybe that does go a long way in saying that, yeah, Jigsaw and Spiral still did happen here. We're not forgetting about it. Maybe we're going to come back to it later. But at least for this, take it as it is. Cinema Clip 60. I'm just glad to see Hoffman again. Maybe a sequel could focus on John and Hoffman's relationship. Yeah, we're going to get to that. I want to talk about that a little bit. But I'm just saying that Saul 11, epic bad luck. Yes. Stereo Crow. That's funny. But Saul 10. So the thing is kind of getting back to why I don't like that scene is I don't necessarily know where it takes place in the content of the rest of the franchise. And I don't necessarily know what happens to Henry's body. If I were to do anything different, I know the Saul bathroom is very popular with the fans. People want to see it. We've been clamoring for it for years, and they wanted to do their best to give the fans what they wanted. But there was no substantive meaning to having it there other than to just show it very briefly. I can't think of any reason. My initial thought, having not rewatched all the movies in a long time, was, oh man, this actually confirms that Hoffman knows where the bathroom is, and that's where they put him in at the ending of Saw 3 or 3D. And I thought about that. Oh, that makes sense. Like, he knows where he is. He probably knows how to get out of there. If he was in there, he might have figured out a way to make sure that he can't get locked in there. But we saw him lead Strom into that tunnel area in Saw 5 in the refurbished Saw 2 house. So yeah, of course he knew where that was. Just because he had never really stepped in there doesn't mean that he wasn't there. So I don't necessarily know what it brings if not that. Second, I don't necessarily know what happens to Henry. There was a lot of me that thought it would have been cool if it took place in the Gideon meatpacking plant, because I feel like a lot of the Saw franchise, especially a lot of the really popular ones, the ones that people saw in theaters, like Saw 3, Saw 4, Saw 5, those are understandable locations. And there's this open question from Saw 5 where Erickson specifically says that over a dozen bodies were found in that place. And if you go back and look at the body count from Saw 3 and Saw 4, it's like 8 people. So what happened to the other 3 people? If it was like Henry or other people, then yeah, that could go a long way in ironing out some of the continuity issues or some of the issues that we've seen throughout this entire franchise that don't necessarily need to connect to this movie, but go a long way for fans to figure it out and to it themselves. I'm surprised they had no Billy laugh in the movie. Did they? I mean, they had no game over in the movie, so that was interesting. I don't think we've had a game over since 2010 in this franchise, which is interesting. It was I Speak for the Dead, Williams, and then this one didn't really have one. Alex Hoffman knew about the Saw bathroom. He helped John in the Saw 2 game. Yeah, I know exactly. There was enough there. We just never seen him in the bathroom. That's what I'm talking about. Missed the live stream, so watch it from start now. Yeah, man, I always wanted this. No cop plot. I didn't expect it. No, I don't think anybody was expecting there to be no cops in this movie, which was obviously something really big. And I think holds up a lot better than what I was anticipating going into the movie, which I'm very happy about. It's not something I wasn't anticipating it. I need to remember to get water if I do this again, because holy crap. So do you think that okay, so didn't Kevin confirm that the post-credits scene wasn't really supposed to lead into a sequel? It was just something for the fans. Yeah, I think it's just for the most part, what the post-credit scene does is it confirms that Hoffman is still around, which essentially confirms that they're not upending the entire continuity going forward. It's not going to be just Saw 10, and then Saw 11, and then Saw 2, Saw 3, Saw 4, Saw 5. None of that happens. Hoffman's still there. That connection's still there. The movies still count, and I think that that's okay. Do you think that Carlos could come back in future as an adult apprentice to Jigsaw? No, I don't want that. I kept thinking, like, why can't it just be William? Like, that. I feel like that's one of the things that I would have been okay with is, yeah, it's just William. It's just William going and, learning about John that way. I don't know if it would have been that bad or that good, but yeah, I'm not entirely sure. Let's see. I'm gonna answer some of these comments as they come in, and then we're gonna move on to the next topic, which I'm really excited to talk about. So, do you think Carlos could be? No, I don't think he can be an apprentice to Jigsaw. I don't want to see that. I don't want to see any more apprentices. We have enough lingering. I want to go back to Logan. I want to go back to Eleanor. I want to go back to William. I love, like, I don't like Spiral, but I like William. I like William a lot because there's that line in Spiral where he's like, "It was Angie." I think that he's putting on a face for that entire movie, and going back to his character would be fucking awesome because I feel like he is so insane that if they brought him back and they played him off like, look, I don't have to put the mask on anymore. I can just be myself because everyone knows who I am, or at least, Zeke knows who I am, and that's the person I still want to impress. God, I want to see that relationship go on. Spiral was by the books. It was boring. It was something that I did not like. But the relationship between William and Zeke is something that I want to explore in more films because those characters are really fun together. And I think that if you throw everything out of the book, literally give him the tap treatment, like, because of everything that happened, Zeke is no longer on the force. He was kicked out dishonorably, discharged, whatever. And then he gets really obsessed about finding the Spiral killer. And those two characters just have this back and forth that's kind of like a weird Batman Joker situation. I love it. And then you can also incorporate Logan into that as well, or maybe some of these characters like Cecilia or Hoffman, because he could be alive. I don't think you're ever going to get Carrie Ellis back again, but man, it would be fucking awesome if he came back, right? Just maybe he could kill him off in the trap in the very beginning, just put him through a trap, let him die, give him that catharsis, give the fans the catharsis of knowing that he's not coming back at the very least, and just live with that. I think that's freaking great. Spiral was an unintentional comedy. True. To the point where it was actually supposed to be a comedy. That's one of the things I want to talk about. One of the topics I have lined up here for us to discuss today. Again, this live stream content, this way that I want to do this, I really hope it works, but I really want this to be able to segment into videos. That's why I'm coming at it with various content that I want to talk about, topics that I want to cover, and then interacting with you guys in between. So I hope it, again, I hope it works out. Let's see. All Zeke was doing was throw temper. Yeah, he's an interesting character. It's just the problem is the execution. Everything about Spiral was really basic and it needed more time to simmer. I don't know. Obviously, some of the things we're going to talk about, I think that they were really pushed, and I have my theories that we're going to discuss, but I digress. Some of the previous Saw actors have talked about wanting to come back for the franchise. Again, we're living in this era where we can go back in time. We don't care about de-aging technology. We don't care about any of that. I say bring them back. I say bring back Carrie. I say bring back Hoffman. I say bring back all these other people. I read that quote too, and I think that primarily what they're talking about is that Costas Mandylor wants to come back as Hoffman. And yeah, for all being like, just bring him back. He's great. I've talked about him on this channel before. He's the he's the unintentional savior of the entire franchise, and just because his character was interesting and he kind of came out at the right time and they were planning for him. So I personally really liked it. Some scenes the scene where he was going to meet a new partner and Zeke and Lady Boss screaming makes me laugh. Again, yeah, Spiral's an unintentional comedy. Yeah, Kevin did say that. I can't wait to see what they do next. Surely it will get the green light soon. I think that's a really good... I think that this is a really good way of moving on to our next topic. And I'm going to let the chat simmer for a little bit and not necessarily talk to you guys because I will get distracted all night talking to you guys. Obviously, don't tempt me. All right, let me just do that. I still don't necessarily know how to toggle things to the best of my ability. But I got a bunch of stuff here opened. This is Box Office Mojo. If you don't use Box Office Mojo, you really should. So right now we're going to talk about Saw 10 and its box office performance. I've been wanting to do a segment like this or recurring segments like this for a really long time, not necessarily talking about the Saw franchise, but box office, because it's really my true love when it comes to all this other stuff. I'm a super nerd for movie content, movie numbers, and the business of all of this. And I do want to discuss just briefly about the box office performance and expectations of Saw 10 going forward and what it means for the overall continuation of the franchise. So I'll bring this up real quick here. So currently, as you can see here, the Saw franchise, or Saw 10, has grossed $24 million, $24 plus million in its first week. These are numbers up until Thursday, October 5th, not counting this Friday's numbers, so we're not entirely sure what that's going to happen. You can see here the international numbers are 11.3 million, encompassing a $35 million dollar take, or close to $36 million take in the first, let's see, there was a 5-day opening in the first 10 days. Now, one of the things that you should know looking at this number right now is the international take is not updated until the weekend. We're not entirely sure how much it made during the weekdays. This number can jump up drastically in the coming, after the coming weekend, and we get updates here. Additionally, the $24 million here is specifically higher now than the entire lifetime domestic gross of Spiral from the Book of Saw. Not an entirely high bar to go over, but certainly the Saw franchise has outgrossed its recent predecessor, because there's very little in me that believes that the international market hasn't already made over $18 million. If it literally is just $18 million, then we can start panicking about whether or not this franchise has that much gas in it. Because while domestic numbers are very important when it comes to the franchise creation of anything, like every territory has different rules as to how much money the theaters get versus the studio. And general rule of thumb is that you have to make about 3 times your budget in order to be profitable at any level in the theatrical run. Granted, we're dealing with movies. I don't want to look at those. We're dealing with movies in a lot of ways that, I think most people hyper focus on the blockbusters right now, the movies that cost, especially this year with Indiana Jones 5 and Fast 10 and all these other movies, $300 plus million. And they're looking at $1 billion gross in order to even become profitable in the theatrical market, let alone the physical media market, the streaming market, and everything in between. The Saw franchise has never had that problem. Generally, the first movie cost a little over $1 million. I think it's 1.2. The second movie cost about $4 or $5 million. Every preceding movie after that through 6 was $10 million. The Saw 3D was $17 million. Jigsaw was $10 million, and Spiral was reported to be $20 million. And that's just the budget. The marketing budget is generally considered, rule of thumb, at least 1.5 to 3 times more. So let's, reports have it that Saw 10 cost $13 million. So theoretically, $13 million plus, let's say, maybe $20 to $25 million on marketing for this movie, maybe a little bit more. I feel like there was a lot more of a push on this one than we've seen in a long time. So I don't know. Let's be conservative and say that it was $25 million. Overall, $38 million on this movie. So this movie, in order to turn a profit, will have to make, around $100 million in order to be profitable. And as we already see here, we're well on our way. I guess you'll have people saying one way or the other that this is, I might be way over perceiving it. In a lot of ways, there's reports saying that this movie probably has to make about $50 million worldwide in order to be profitable. I think that those are lower than necessary. I think that this has to make around $75 to $80 million worldwide in order to be legitimately profitable on the theatrical side. And then everything after that is a legitimate bonus. Everything in terms of physical media sales, streaming, and for whatever it's worth, merchandise, which isn't really that big of an issue when it comes to the Saw franchise. So, one of the things that I'm seeing on the chat, the Saw this movie is coming out. It is important to note that this movie's coming out on the 20th on digital, which I know a lot of people in chat are kind of saying one way or the other, and there's legitimate concern here there's legitimate concern considering the fact that this movie could benefit from the Halloween season. So as we get closer to Halloween, or if they were to give it some kind of a theatrical bump where they're putting it back on more screens for a limited time, you could see a significant bump in the gross for people who go to see it on that specific day. I think one of the things people aren't thinking about when we talk about a digital release for this movie on the 20th is that Halloween falls on a weekday this year, which is always kind of unbeneficial to the studio. And by that time, for better or worse, this movie will have already played for the vast majority of its entire run. It won't be making that much more money. And even if they do push it onto more screens during that one specific day, it's not going to make $1 million on Halloween. It's not going to be worth it for them to go about making those deals and spending money in order to put it out on screens. Especially when you have bigger competition like Exorcist Believer has to be playing around that time. You have Five Nights at Freddy's at that time, which even though that movie is going to be both day and date streaming with theaters, it's still looking, especially with early box office reports, to be a major player going forward. So it's going to be really interesting to see how that pans out. But I do want to kind of go back to Jigsaw in 2017 because I've been seeing a lot of people talk about how Spiral from the book. I've been seeing a lot of people talk about how Saw 10 is going to be the highest grossing movie of the entire Saw franchise, which, let's not kid ourselves, that will need to be higher than Saw 3's back in 2006. And this is without the inflation that we've seen from Saw 2006 all the way to 2023, which has been not insurmountable, but fairly significant. It will need about $165 million. And based on what I'm seeing here, and how this movie can do this weekend, it's projected to make about $8 million, maybe a little bit over $8 million in its second weekend. Granted, that's bigger than Jigsaw and that's bigger than Spiral. I believe Jigsaw had a little over 6 million in its second domestic weekend. Let me just pull this up real quick for you so we can look at it. Yeah, $6.5 million on a 60% decline from its opening weekend of $16 million. That's not uncommon for a horror movie franchise, specifically a horror movie franchise that is Saw. This franchise has notoriously very front-loaded box office takes, and everything that comes in the opening weekend is probably going to be 50%, if not maybe a little bit more, of everything that it makes in the domestic box office. In order for Saw 10 to get to the heights of Saw 3 back in 2006, it's going to do some major lifting in the international markets. And while that's not entirely unheard of, I don't necessarily I don't see it happening for this specific release. There's a couple of factors that kind of play into this. One, even though it is doing fairly well in the United Kingdom, it's important to note that Jigsaw did not necessarily do very well in the United Kingdom as opposed to some of the previous releases in this franchise. And this movie opened up less than Jigsaw in those areas, or at least on par. So we're looking at probably a $6 to $8 million finish in the United Kingdom for this. Historically, a very good market for this franchise, and something that is definitely worth looking at. I'm not entirely sure of this one way or the other, but again, another historically good market for this franchise has been Russia. And given everything that's going on in the world, I don't necessarily believe that it's going to be playing in Russia. So you can kind of kiss away an average of $5 million on the overall take for this movie that even something like Jigsaw got. Which can be fairly significant when you're talking about the difference between a $95 million movie and a $100 million movie on the worldwide box office. Not that it really matters. I think that this movie does turn a profit theatrically, as I said, even if it doesn't hit $100 million, but certainly looks one way or the other with, with Lionsgate and everybody on every level, whether or not this movie was a flop or success. A big note to talk about, though, is the amount of money it's making in Mexico. This movie is... Oh, you know what? I got all mixed up on this. Let me just... Oh, no, it's there. I was like... I have the chat open. I have the chat open, so I wasn't necessarily seeing the whole screen. So this movie has already made more in this movie has already made more money in Mexico than it has. Yeah, I am sorry. I'm not even paying attention to chat. I'm just literally talking here. This movie has already made more in Mexico than the previous two movies have in their entire runs. Obviously, one of the things that, if you read about this movie's creation, one of the things that the producers at Twisted Pictures looked into before greenlighting this project was a big portion of the fan base is of Latin descent for the Saw franchise. That's one of the reasons they put it in Mexico. They realized that they have a big fan base in these general regions like the Spanish-speaking world, and this was the best way to express gratitude in one way or the other in setting the film here. I think it works pretty well, and given the box office take from Mexico alone, let alone Spain is also doing fairly well. We're going to see how it does in Brazil and all these other countries. I think that this was certainly something that benefited them in the long run, and it's going to be really interesting to see how these movies fare, because like I said, already more money in Mexico than Jigsaw made in total, and Spiral, but Spiral's still not necessarily the best mode of explanation or comparison, because Obviously, Spiral came out during the heights of the pandemic in a way of trying to bring back movies to any specific relevance, and it just didn't really happen. With all of this being said, and everything that I've tried to kind of put in here, I wanted to go back to this report that was put out from Bloody Disgusting back in 2017 in relation to Jigsaw's box office success. One, I think this puts it into really good perspective. As I already broke it down, Saw 10 has already made $35 million worldwide. Granted, it opened up higher on its opening weekend than Jigsaw did. Marginally, but still better. Worldwide at the very least. But I do think it's interesting to note, and some kind of freezes things in time without having to look at it number by number. On October 13th, the eighth film in the Saw franchise had already made $79 million worldwide on a $10 million budget. I'm going to be very interested to see how this movie fares in its second weekend, both domestically and worldwide. I feel like it's really safe to say that Spiral, I keep saying Spiral, I think it's really interesting, and I think it's worth noting that, I think it's worth noting that, I think it's worth noting that Spiral, again, this is why I probably need to go get a drink real quick here. I think it's really interesting and worth noting that Saw 10 is definitely going to outgross Jigsaw as well as Spiral. By how much, I'm not entirely sure. Given the fact that it's running about 11% ahead, give or take, at this point from where Jigsaw was at the same time, I think it's worth saying that it's going to make about $40 million domestically. My highest guess would probably be $43 million. And if the 60 international, 40 domestic haul of pretty much all of the later sequels of this franchise line up as the way they are, we're looking at about like 107, maybe just a little above where Jigsaw and the original Saw were, but certainly not the biggest in the entire franchise. With that being said, again, this is a completely different film era than it was in 2017. And knowing that Jigsaw had made $79 million worldwide after its second weekend, if we're not there by this time next week, then we're not catching up. And again, like I said, it's possible that we're looking at a $90 million, $95 million movie, which by no means is not a success, especially when you're starting to figure out how many people are going to rent this digitally on their home media systems during the events of Halloween this year, especially with how bad Believer is. And the fact that even though you could go see Five Nights at Freddy's, you probably might stream it on that day as well. So people aren't going to pick one after another. They might pick both. So that could be very good for this movie going forward, and certainly a new revenue stream. One of the other things to think about is Lionsgate is now pitching itself away from the Starz streaming platform. They're trying to sell it. I haven't read about this in a really long time, but they are trying to sell it. And one of the big reasons I bring this up is when talking about streaming revenue for movies like this, for studios that have a streaming site, it's not about, profiting off of this movie. It's more about in studio executive accounting, where one branch of an entity goes, well, we'll move over money that was allocated to us over to you. And, it's not necessarily the same thing as profiting. It might seem that way, but it's really shady, and it's part of the whole problem with Hollywood in general. So that's necessarily something to think about, is because they're moving away from stars, I wonder if this relationship continues where Saul 10 has the same kind of red carpet situation that Spiral did, where it debuted streaming on Stars and it kind of stayed there for its entirety. Or does this become an issue where now they can shop it around, and the Saw franchise has made its way on Max, it's made its way on, Prime over the last couple of years, and because this was a critical success, are they going to shop it around to another studio streaming platform? They're not tied to Stars anymore and potentially get more money. I think that could be an issue that they kind of dabble in. And we're going to have to wait and see whether or not that's beneficial to them. But again, that's something that is obviously on their mind, and it's going to be something that makes this movie even more profitable than it already is going to be. Additionally, one of the things that we've seen over the last couple of years is even though the home media market is falling drastically when it comes to how these movies, like how much money they can make on home video, they still make several $1 million. It's a dying form of media, but it's still something that people, especially people like me, collectors, go out and make sure they get. It wasn't necessarily a big take when it came to Jigsaw or Spiral, and certainly by the time this movie hits shelves, potentially in November, if not sometime in December, maybe they wait until January if this movie is a huge success. But by the time we get that on our store shelves, obviously the entire market's going to be less strong than it was when the Jigsaw or Spiral came out. It's just the nature of the beast. It goes down a certain percentage point every single year. But with that being said, it's possible that this movie makes about $2 million sells enough units to make about $2 million in DVDs, and potentially that in Blu-rays and 4K HD DVD. And so that's just additionally just another revenue stream. And when you're talking about a $13 million movie and the cheapness that it is to create digital downloads as well as home media market, it's not as strong as it used to be. I mean, to put it into perspective, I believe you would have to look this up. I haven't looked at it in a while, but I believe Saw 2 made $45 million. Yes, they made a lot of they made a lot of money on the box office and theatrically, but one of the things that certainly kept this movie series alive and churning out every single year was just the ridiculous amount of money they were making on home video sales every single year, with $45 million or something with Saw 2 and something very close to that with Saw 3. It was something that obviously just kept the doors open, not only for Twisted Pictures, but also for Lionsgate as they were trying to find their footing as one of the biggest independent movie studios in Hollywood. So we're not there anymore, but still $13 million movie, as well as theatrically profitable. It's something to at least think about. Another thing that I wanted to focus on this movie, in this article here, is when thinking about how much money a movie makes in relation to the amount that it has to make in the theatrical box office, the amount of money it pulls from digital downloads when it becomes rentable, the home media market, and all this other stuff. It is, and I believe that this is really important to focus on, this line right here. The problem with box office reporting is that there are many factors that decide if a film is successful or not. We should be asking as to whether or not the studio owns the property or just acting as the distributors. What percentage gross does the distributor get? What did they spend on PR or marketing? There's quite a bit more to factor in the secret numbers of the film, but we're trying to just be precise. And the thing is this is really important to talk about when it comes to the Saw franchise and why they continue to make these in relation to some of the other horror movie franchises that have come out from the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s, and all this other stuff. Why is the Saw franchise on its 10th film when, something like Scream, which is hugely successful, is only on its 6th, and it had so many breaks and all this other stuff? It's really just a rights issue. I mean, Lionsgate owns, they essentially just own the right, they own the distribution and everything for the Saw franchise. They don't have to share it with anyone, and they only profit. And because these movies generally make their money back, other than maybe Spiral, and that was a very specific case, and I'm not entirely sure how well it did digitally, but probably just scraped by and making its money back. So why not roll the dice, try again, and do the movie that they wanted to do in the first place with Saw 10? So that's kind of why they keep churning them out, is they literally have no downside. And it's not the same thing that the original Friday the 13th were, where you have a studio like Paramount that likes the money that they're bringing in, but is genuinely embarrassed to be able to put them out, which was the case in the 80s. And it's certainly not what was happening with Freddy at the time, where they were running it into the ground with every known thing, to the point where you have an explosion of 1 or 2 movies and then everyone loses interest, because you have books, you have call lines, you have television shows, you have comic books, you have all this other stuff with Robert Englund's Freddy Krueger, and people just get tired of it. The Saw franchise has been able to incorporate itself into a very narrow market for the vast majority of the last 20 years, and has essentially continued to scrape that market for everything that it's worth. And even though a lot of people might point to that and say, hey, this is why these movies suck and this is why you really shouldn't like them, I think for us fans, the people who love these franchises and want to see them continue, it's really nice to have work that doesn't necessarily rely on groundbreaking or record-breaking numbers every single time. And yeah, again, that's why we're going to get much more of this. This is why we're going to have way more Saw movies, I believe, with Saw 11 and Saw 12, things that they should certainly be thinking about right now, given this movie's success, especially with the fact that it was the 10th entry in the entire series. So I'm really excited about that. Anyway, I wanted to let's get back to the I want to get back to the thing here so I can actually answer some of y'all's questions. That was kind of something I've been really wanting to talk about for a long time. I love the number stuff, and hopefully by the time I get a little bit more relaxed in this format and everything, we can talk about it, and I'll be able to synthesize this information a little bit more than how I just did it, because I feel like I was rambling for a long time, and that's not necessarily what I want to do, especially since I want to keep my voice. Stereo Crow, the Hoffinator, the bathroom. Okay, let's see. Alex, Carlos should have been the young William. Should have been the reason he did what he did in Spiral. Would have been epic and awesome to connect to John. I agree with that. I feel like that's exactly what I wanted. I was a little bit annoyed that they didn't, do that easy layup for the entire franchise. I mean, would have just been easy. I understand they wanted to kind of keep that separate, and it was something they even considered doing in Spiral. Not necessarily connecting it in this way, but having William meet John when he was younger or something like that, right? Just to have Tobin Bell in the movie. I'm kind of happy with the fact that they didn't do that, but it's something that I'm happy that they did. God, how do people do this for hours? All right. I guess people just don't sit around and talk to the camera they let other things happen. Yeah, I still wish they would have done that. It would have made me happy as a fan, even though a lot of people wouldn't have gotten it. But why not? Again, you should also bring Logan back, or at least call back to him in some way. Maybe they did. Again, no one said it in the chat, and I don't think it's in there. Let's see. I've been dying for you to go live and talk more about Saul. Thanks, man. Yeah, like that's why I wanted to do it with this one. I think that it was going to be fun to figure that, like try to figure out this format by talking about something that I can literally talk about for hours, and I'm going to. I mean, I don't even know how long I've been talking at this point, but obviously going to be sitting here for hours talking and destroying my voice. So y'all, we can all just hang out. I think that that's fantastic. See, I didn't like Jigsaw 2017 movie. I did. That movie, if this is just me, and maybe it is just me, Jigsaw, sorry, I'm getting a little confused. Maybe this is just me. I think Jigsaw is really good. It makes me happy. Every single time I watch that movie, I feel like it's better than what I gave it credit for back when it first came out. I feel like the first time I watched it, I was just really happy to have the Saw franchise back, and that kind of put me in the nostalgia feels. But then I think about it a little bit more critically, and it has its problems, but the more and more I watch those movies, the more I like them, because I think Eleanor is a really cool character and someone I would really like to see come back in future installments. And at the same time, I think Logan is interesting, and I want to see him be explored a little bit more. I always thought that one of the things you can do with Logan in order to bring back Tobin Bell in a legitimate way without having to bring him back is just have Logan be freaking crazy and have him literally just talking to John, like he's there, kind of like they did with Harry and Dexter. It worked in that, and I liked it for what it's worth. Sorry, I'm trying to make sure that I'm live in the best way possible. Okay, so moving on with some of the comments. That's way too early for. So also Saw 10 coming out in digital. Yeah, I saw that comment. I wanted to cover that, and I think we covered it. I think it is. Saw 10 coming out on digital on the 20th is early. It seems early, like I said, but I think it makes sense in a lot of ways because. That's a really good point. Yeah, okay, this is a really good point. I misspoke if I said it this way. This is right. Well, it depends on the movie. I think it depends on the movie, but for something like Saw, this is a good point from LD Burkew. I sorry, man. He says actually marketing budgets is usually equal to about 50% of the production budget. So the studio's totally spent for Saw 10 is approximately $20 million. This movie needs to be profitable as $60 million globally. That's a good point. I misspoke with that. You're right. But again, it does depend on the movie. Some of the bigger movies, not necessarily 50%, but certainly will they report how much it costs, but in reality they don't necessarily spend marketing budget on one specific film with the intention of spending it on that film. This is why they don't report it. Studios will buy ad space and information. They'll buy space and time and stuff on television, on all this other stuff, and they'll slot it in later. That's why these are metrics. These are like 50%, 60%, whatever it is, because nobody really knows. these like they have all this space, they need to fill it, so they just fill it with whatever's coming out one way or the other. And that's more of an easy way of thinking about like why you sit there and see this is the production budget of this movie, this is the production budget of this movie, but it doesn't ever tell you how much it's spent on marketing. And every time that you hear how much it was spent on marketing, it's literally just the best guess or estimate from people who work in the area, or even just people who comment on it like me, or people in the chat. So just a little bit of extra fluff for there, but I agree, and I did misspeak. Yeah, it needs to make about $60 million, not 70 or 80. Like I said, that's a good point. If it's Halloween, it must be Saw. That's true. It's true. I love William too, hoping they come back to it. The Logan reveal made me so unbelievably angry. The only thing I liked about that film was Eleanor and the whole fandom angle. The film is so terrible. Eleanor is really great. I love Eleanor being a super fan. I love the fact of her and William being characters who have no direct communication or tangible connection with John, but they have explored his ideas in the most unique ways possible. Like, one just became like, hey, I can use this to reform everything. And one of them was like, I'm just going to fangirl out about John. I would love to have met him, but like, he's my idol. And I feel like that's a good culmination of like what fandoms do online. So I don't know, they both really resonate with me. And I feel like that's something that I would like to see going forward. I would really like to see more movies like Spiral, just things that are a little bit less by the book than Spiral, talking about John's legacy and how people have taken his message and bastardized it or perfected it. Because as I've talked about on this channel and others, John was wrong. He's really, 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 really wrong in a lot of what he tries to do. So it's not surprising. It's certainly not surprising that there's any real indication that I guess I'm saying it's not surprising that there would be people who don't understand what they're supposed to get out of this or how they're supposed to carry on the message going forward. People like Amanda or Hoffman or even William or something like that. Like, John wouldn't have wanted this, I don't think. Maybe he would have. That's interesting. I want to explore that a little bit more, and that's why I like those characters. The way you guys feel about Jigsaw is the same way I feel about Spiral. I don't know why. I just really enjoy the movie. So much of that brought so much that I bought a Mr. Snuggles pop from Trick or Treat Studios. Prop. That's awesome. I really like Mr. Snuggles. Again, like, there's so much love about Spiral. It's not my least favorite of the franchise by far, and some of the characters are really interesting. I would love to see Zeke and William again. That dynamic is really cool. I just don't want it to be a stupid cop procedural. I really don't. But I understand. It has many flaws, and I can see why some people don't feel the same way I do. Yeah, Stereo. I feel like that's very true. The only thing that bugs me about Jigsaw is that the flat TVs, the flat TVs, they should be old-fashioned tube screens. Yeah, my stupid headcanon, and this is stupid, but my stupid headcanon there is that the very first trap that John did, like that big old trap, like bankrupted him because he was spending like thousands of dollars on the bad screens, and he was like, you know what, I'm just gonna put this in dirty rooms with old ass TVs now because it's just the only way that I can do this on the cheap, and I just spent all this money and blah blah blah. Like, no, it's stupid, but that's kind of my joke. I have the Mr. Snuggles prop too. I like Spiral a lot. I dislike Jigsaw. It's the only one I really feel they screwed up bad in the final arc. I think a lot of them screw up in the final arc. I mean, like, I don't like Saw 5's ending. I mean, I like the ending itself, but I don't like the ending. Maybe that's just me. Maybe. I don't know. Okay. Moving on to our final topic here, and then I'll see what chat has to say, and then I'll kind of close this out because it's getting late on my end, and I just want to do my best to make sure that we're all copacetic and we're not here all night. So moving on, I wanted to talk a little bit about the sequel ideas for Saw 10. This isn't something I've really talked about with anybody yet, and I'm not entirely sure anyone's going to like my ideas, but I feel like they're interesting and stuff that I would really like to see going forward. 1 second. Yes? I'm still streaming.
Okay.
What? Bye.
Are you with someone?
What?
Are you with someone?
No.
Okay.
Okay, bye.
Hug?
I'm on camera.
Okay.
Sorry. All right, sorry about that. Yeah, it's super late. I've been wanting to do this all day, and I just finally got the time. This is my wife. So I'll do my best to wrap this up as soon as possible so I can go say goodnight to her. With that being said, Saw 10 sequel ideas. I haven't necessarily talked about this with anybody, but other than just kind of sharing ideas with myself and a couple of my friends, but never really coming up with anything that could work one way or the other. With that said, I feel like with that said, I feel like this movie needs to focus on a very personalized trap in the same way that Saw 10 did. But because Tobin Bell is 81, and the fact that you have to bring him back and it has to be set either right after this movie or sometime in the 6 months between Saw 2 and Saw 3, I say put him in one room with one other person and let it play out that way. Bring it back to very bare basics with it kind of playing out as the reverse or some kind of homage to the first film. And the only way I can think about that is you either have him talk to a priest or a therapist about his sins or stuff he's trying to get off his chest or things he's trying to work out in his final days. So he's essentially almost on his deathbed. You have him in the same physical state as he was in the flashbacks before Saw 3, in Saw 6, where he's on his wheelchair and he's barely able to get around, or in the flashbacks that we saw in Saw 3, where he's walking around and placing all the stuff for Amanda to find, or for Jeff to find, in relation to Lynn, that Amanda was not privy to because she had to be taken, like she couldn't understand the relationship between Jeff and Lynn, all of that stuff. With that being said, he's talking to a therapist, he's talking to a priest or something, trying to get everything off his chest. And I talked about there's an episode of Dexter that I really like, that I would kind of take inspiration from a little bit with this, in which he speaks to he goes to see a therapist that he knows is subtly telling people to kill themselves, commit, to unalive themselves. I don't want to I'm going to get hit by YouTube's algorithm, sure. So he goes there and he poses as someone. He goes to a couple of sessions to kind of get this guy's perspective, and it makes him understand a little bit more about himself. And by the end of it, he's like, by the way, I'm a serial killer and blah, blah, blah. And, oh, it feels good and everything, but I'm going to take you out. I think that I would take that as a bit of inspiration for this, where the priest is either really bad or the therapist is really bad, and John knows that, but John is having thoughts of himself in that way too, where it's catching up to him in some way, shape, or form that like, maybe I am putting guns to people's heads and telling them to pull the trigger or something. Like he's having a crisis of faith. So he's looking to express his anger or his frustration with his legacy and everything with this character through the whole film. And the concept of it is only one of us is going to leave this room, going, like I said, back to the bathroom, where you have to kill me or I have to kill you or whatever, right? Or like whatever the thing is. I don't know how to word it. I'm not the writer here, and I don't even know what I would put in there. But I think the twist is the therapist a therapist priest or something ends up choosing their life or whatever, and that triggers something that ultimately like kills them or something, and the clues were all there and the conversation and yada yada yada. In the interim, I think that one of the things we're also focusing on, hopefully primarily, is Amanda, who is now taken up ownership of the traps, and she's putting it out there. Hey, like this person's in a trap, this person's in a trap, blah, blah, blah. And one of the things I would really like to see from this is during that 6 months between Saw 2 and Saw 3, you see her put people in a trap. Maybe you start off with something like this, and then Amanda, as she's preparing for the next one and the next one, so there's like 2 or 3, 4 in this whole movie, with the big one going on with John talking to this guy, you see Amanda follow these people or see how the people who survived their traps start living their life. And at first, they're like her, it's like, oh, he helped me and everything. There's so much joy in the world. They see things differently. They change their life. But one of the things she realizes is these people go back right away to like who they were. They fall back into their same habits. And it also makes her think about her life and how she's also falling back into her same habits, how she gave up one drug for another, and that it's like, well, these people don't change. And she's fighting with the concept about whether or not she's changed and why she's changed and all this other stuff. So her story is this culmination of like, I've seen these people, I've tried to help these people in the way that John taught me how to help people, the same way he helped me. They got out of it. They chose life. They understand the value of life, but then they go right back to who they are. That's why she starts rigging traps. And I feel like that's the last trap of the movie, where you see her like do something that's going to rig the trap in someone's favor where they're going to die. That would be interesting to me. That would kind of fill the trap quota where, yes, you have things going on. You have brutality. That's obviously what a lot of fans want to see. But it's more tied to her character and the arc that she goes through in between, the first through the third film, and kind of helps to bridge that gap a little bit more. Super interesting, in my opinion. Another thing I would like to see is Hoffman, him meeting Cecilia, or Cecilia coming back for some kind of revenge and everything. And as I already talked about a little bit with my review of this movie, I think that it would be nice to start connecting things. I think it doesn't have to be the main focus of the movie. Maybe, like I'm saying, the C plot of all of this, or even something that plays out at the beginning and end. It doesn't necessarily touch the entire story, but I think what you would do is you play it off. One of the things that we saw with Cecilia is she likes to manipulate and use people and basically get what she wants by telling people what they want to hear or doing things that they think they want or something in between. So I think you just have her do that with Hoffman. I know a lot of people would hate this, that, you're making Hoffman the kind of a bit of a henchman to Cecilia, and that kind of takes away from his character a lot. But you can play him up in other sequels and stuff to kind of make him still more assertive. But the point is like, she convinces him, she blackmails him, she does something to put him in John and Amanda, like put John and Amanda in his crosshairs, where he thinks that he can get away from John and still do this or something. Like she convinces him this. And one of the things I would really like to see is, because she's so rich, because she's so connected to everything going on, you start connecting like, well, how did Hoffman understand that Amanda was there the night that Cecil killed Gideon? Like, how did he ever figure that out? They never said that. He just knew it, and John apparently didn't, and all this other stuff. Just have Cecilia come in and be like, "Hey, I want to play this game with you. I want to do this. I want you to do this for me. Here's information that you need to know and how I want to play this going forward." So she's also trying to mastermind her way of getting back at John, and somewhat works, somewhat doesn't. But then you also, because you've introduced Cecilia back and you've tied her with Hoffman, you do open up the door where you can go back to the Saw 3D era and start making movies that way, and bringing in, hopefully, Hoffman into the proceedings, or more of a present day storyline where you have Hoffman, Cecilia, and hopefully other big characters that we've seen throughout the last couple of films. Like you can bring back Zeke. Probably not. I mean, we don't know. You can bring back Dr. Gordon. Again, probably not, but we don't know. And then you have, you can bring back William. You can bring back Eleanor and all these other characters. And then you kind of have this standoff. What does Cecilia want to do? Is Saw 12 just Cecilia putting all of the remaining people in traps, right? That would be kind of cool. Like, kill off Dr. Gordon at the very end of it, at the very beginning. I mean, like, just like literally make him the cold opening kill. Carrie Ellis doesn't want to come back, but maybe he'll come back in order to get away from the franchise forever and have people stop asking him. I can see that. And then you have all these other characters that have been built up through this kind of mini multi-universal connected storyline that was, kind of haphazardly retconned together into being like, the end game of Saw 12 is everything in the modern era, and all the characters who have tried to continue John's legacy or somehow continued it or anything. Cecilia's taking them out one by one in Saw traps in order to continue to spit on John for everything that he did to her. And then you can turn the tables around in one way or the other. And I don't know how you would do that. If you're going to kill off Carrie Ellis, then I don't know, maybe pay him a bunch of money and you can have Lee Winnell come back and finally give Adam fans what they've been wanting this whole time. But that seems like Saw 3D level nonsense. So it's just, I don't know. These are really just general ideas. I have never really thought about this in one way, shape, or form. I have them. They're written down, but they're not in any real order, or they're not in any real dialogue heavy or structure or anything else like that. Not even a beginning, middle, and end. Just a lot of things I would like to see from a particular sequel from Saw 10. If it's not going to be that, if you're not going to have Cecilia, if you're not going to have John or anything, I think that one of the things you should do is forget about Saw 10, forget about Cecilia, forget about everything that happened in Mexico, and just do another character study. And if you're going to do that, then make it about Amanda. John has had so much screen time. The character is going to be on his deathbed in any legitimate continuation. Plus, Tobin Bell's 81 years old. Give the guy a break. Let him sit down. Let him lay down again like he was in 2006 and emote with Amanda in that way. But give it to Amanda. One of the things I would like to see if they ever explore anything in her character is, I remember back in either the commentary or some interviews or something where she would talk about like, well, we never really explored this. It was never really in the script, but the idea was, what was Amanda like? How did Amanda get to this point in her life? Obviously, Eric Matthews, he ended up getting in her way. He ended up framing her. She went to jail. She got addicted to heroin and drugs, and then she ended up hurting herself, and John came in, taught her something else, taught her to believe in something else, and took her on as his protege. And But for her, it's like, well, this didn't just start with Eric Matthews. There's a lot of anger in this woman, and she doesn't necessarily know where to put it. And as I already talked about, there's stuff I'd love to see if you're going to focus on her is her putting people through traps and then seeing how they don't appreciate their lives going forward. Her idea was Amanda's father was abusive, or she had a very bad relationship with her father. And we never explored that. But this is what Shawnee Smith kind of put out there. It's like, what if she puts her father through a trap? You know, John always says it can never be personal, but it's always personal. And he's probably a bad person anyway, who's not appreciating his life one way or the other. So you put him through a trap in the same way of Jeff's trap or something, where he has to go from one thing to another. He helps people, like he legitimately like pulls people out of the rubbish. Like, not just him survives. It's not like a Jeff situation. Like maybe one or two people die, but like the vast majority of them live because they work together, and he's turned over a new leaf or something. And that kind of puts her in this situation. It was like, well, maybe he's changed. Maybe he's a different person. I can contact him or anything else like that. But at the end of the day, like, he's still like, after all of that, he's still pissed off. He's like still mean. He's still aggravated on like just general in life stuff. He doesn't like her, blah, blah, blah. And that pushes her into being like, well, no, screw that. Like after everything that guy put me through, after all this other stuff, like people don't appreciate their lives. They don't appreciate what we're trying to do. And she starts rigging traps that way. I don't know. I think that would be interesting. It's something that I would like to see. Make it really personal for her character and her story, and give us something that we didn't already get in the previous sequels that were out. One of the things that I love about Saw 3 is that it's really the biggest FU movie that I can think of, especially for a trilogy capper, where they kill off John and Amanda and pretty much everyone who could have potentially continued the series going forward, with very little to go off of from that movie onward. Also, one of the reasons I absolutely love Saw 4 is because, or I don't know if I meant Saw 3 if I said Saw 4 previously, but I love Saw 4 because that movie picks up in a really interesting way, interconnects with Saw 3 in a really interesting way, and brings all of this together in something that I personally really like. But at the same time, doing everything that they did with Saw 3 and taking out John and Amanda at the same time, I think really robbed the franchise and the fans of an interesting perspective going forward. I really liked Amanda's character in the first two movies. I really liked her in the third movie. I think she was still probably one of my favorite characters. I know that Tobin Bell's everyone's favorite character, but I really like Amanda, and I don't think she was ever really given her due. So I would really like to see her be the star of a movie and something that we never really got to get before. So those are my ideas. At the same time, I know that somebody said earlier, like, oh, just put Hoffman and John together and show their relationship. It's like, yeah, I would love to see that too. But we got a lot of that in 4 and 5 and 6 and those type of movies. So I think we've seen a lot of that relationship. Certainly we've seen more of Amanda and John, but I don't necessarily think it's worth exploring all that much. Plus, if you focus on Amanda, you have a better opportunity to focus on Logan, because I feel like Amanda would have known Logan and interacted with him more than someone like Hoffman. I feel like Hoffman's really a lone wolf in all of this, and he was interacting primarily with John. At least that's kind of what it feels like at the very end, where Dr. Gordon takes him out and puts him in the bathroom, where he's like, what the, like he didn't realize that there was anybody left to take him out. Even if he knew about Gordon, he didn't think that Gordon was like interactive or something, or some kind of a threat. You know what I mean there? So yeah, like those are some ideas I have for this particular sequel. Again, in no order, no ideas of where it goes from there, but stuff that I really appreciate and would really like to see going forward in this franchise. But yeah, those are my ideas. What are y'all's? I know I always just ignore chat when I'm talking about these things, because like I said, I wanted to intercut and interact, just put these on the channel, maybe with very minimal editing and everything, and just kind of get those out there. I'm still ironing out the details here and figuring out what it's going to happen, but yeah, like that's kind of my thought process there and how I'm going to do it. Another another thing I would like to see, because I feel like it would probably be best. We've talked a little bit here about the box office success of these movies and why it's still going to make sense for them to make Saw 11 as a movie itself. But I personally think it would be more interesting if instead of a movie, they forego that and they make a streaming show or an HBO show or Showtime or something where they can do a little bit more blood and guts, a little bit more risque type of stuff. But they just make a TV show that fills in the gaps of everything that I talked about, and hopefully bring in other characters, like, bring in Costas Mandylor, bring in Matt Passmore, bring in all these other just bring in characters from all different eras of the Saw franchise and tell a winding story that takes place primarily in between 2 and 3. And then you can jump in between, go to post Jigsaw, go to post Saw 3, go to post Saw 3D, the final chapter, and see what happened to Hoffman and all this other stuff. And instead of telling multiple stories, because quite frankly, I don't know how much longer we're going to have Tobin Bell, and you want him to be a primary focus and get all these stories out, get all those stories out, wrap up everything, and hopefully leave it off on a way that has people excited more about, more Hoffman or more Logan or more William, more any of these characters, and then do movie franchise sequels for that. Kind of in the same way that Chucky is. I want to talk about Chucky and that success and how I feel like more horror franchise should be trying to riff off of that in future discussions, but that it's fascinating to me, and I don't quite understand it. With that being said, let's jump into some of the comments and then hopefully get out of here, because I've been streaming for God knows how long. All right, let's see. Saw 11 needs to take place between 2 and 3 and to explain Amanda going crazy, and did Hoffman influence her to pull the 180, and if John knows what's going on between those two. Again, like I said, that's exactly what I would really like to see. And if I think Cecilia is going to be a very big fan favorite, so bringing her back in some way, shape, or form, or having her be the catalyst into Hoffman going into this direction, and maybe he starts to play into her craziness or something and having her do that 180. Again, you can start connecting a lot of this stuff and make the experience of watching, if you watch it in order, 1, 10, 2, 11, 3, that 5 films start really making sense, and then picking then up after 3D at the ending of 11 or ending of 12 or whatever, and having Cecilia free Hoffman, now everybody's left on the board who's still alive, is probably the best way to do this going forward, and something that I would really like to see. Tony Down Under says, welcome back. I hope Saw 11 and 12 continue to develop these characters. I agree. And one of the things I haven't discussed, but I do want to discuss at a later time, is I want there to be more Saw sequels. And if they're not going to do a TV show, then I say, maybe this is just me, but I would really say that they should film the next 2 back to back, just to have as much Tobin Bell as possible. And, profit be damned or something. Just say, hey, we're doing this. It's a big story. If it's going to be set 6 months between Saw 1 or Saw 2 and Saw 3, that whole 6 months, just make one gigantic story. And say, hey, this is the next 2, 11 and 12 are the next 2. We're going to connect everything, standalone, working its way into interconnecting with things that came before and hopefully setting up things that come after. But swan song to Tobin Bell and putting all of that together, I think that would be fantastic. I think that would be, I would applaud them for doing something like that or a TV show. It says, LD says, great ideas. I'd be happy with any one of those sequels. Yeah, I think any of these would be awesome. Let's see. VI, the whole Logan thing was so stupid. I still can't believe it. I still can't believe it's 6 years later. It still angers me. Also, the nephew dodgy bike thing and the baby smothering child shit. Blah blah blah. The flat screens. Yeah, okay. We're just gonna. I understand. Not a lot of people like Jigsaw. I get it. I see where you're coming from with Billy lighting up eyes. I don't place of Spiral. Yeah, it could have been better. But something new and exciting to me. Yeah, Spiral was new. Spiral was exciting to some degree. My point was it was a lot of. It wasn't necessarily. It was a difference without a distinction. It felt like just any other Saw film, at least to me. Like, if it wasn't about cops, I think it would have been great. Like, the fact that it was about cops, we never got away. Like I was saying earlier, we never got away from cops in the Saw franchise. It's crazy. Jigsaw had plot holes, which made it not that fun to watch. Besides the really cool score in the movie, just like Spiral had a great soundtrack and score. Yeah, I mean. The Saw franchise always has a really good soundtrack. Also, shout out to Charlie Clouser, who just broke the world record for most consecutive scores in a movie franchise. That's really awesome. I think 11 should be John plus everyone's story. Further flesh out John's relationship with his disciples and one disciple to another. Everyone together for one film could be very pleasing. Again, like, I think that's true, but I think the one thing that would really help this is you have, instead of it being that type of story, like that type of interconnecting my relationship with this person, and that person and everything. It can't just be one movie. I think it would be really awesome if they're like, hey, we're filming 11 and 12 back to back, and it's a two-parter of a story, and we're going to, release it year after, like one after another, and blah, blah, blah. Like, and it all takes place within the 6 months between Saw 2 and Saw 3. I think that would be really exciting, and I think that would be enough time to explore a little bit more of the relationships between John and his disciples during those two stories, and really kind of tie it all together and hopefully end the franchise, or at least put it off on a good boat where people would be okay with seeing it continue with others, not necessarily Tobin Bell, because they're going to have to cross that ship at some point if they really want to keep making them. But again, if you make a good swan song that helps bridge that gap, creates the relationship between those people, and ties up as much loose ends as possible, I think fans would be pretty, excited about everything coming after that. Plus, I've always been a fan of the fact that maybe comic books, novels, whatever you want to do, the concept, the character, and everything could be kept alive in various mediums. It doesn't always have to be movies. The Saw franchise is notorious about like not doing as much as other ones. And I already talked about, like Freddy Krueger, Jason Voorhees, and all these other people, like they ran those characters and concepts and franchises into the ground because they made so much media surrounding them. And while that is good and bad, I think that I really think that it would have been fun to have that with Saw, because the story is really interconnected, and it would have been fun to see, like, hey, more stuff like the video game. Is it canon and is it not canon? Do you really care? I don't care. I play that. I consider it canon. I'd have to go back and look at it, but I don't really see anything or know anything right now that's been introduced in any of the movies that would go directly against that. So why can't they be canon? I like it. If anything, we need to end with Saw 12 and just continue with Spiral 2 because it ends in a cliffhanger at the ending. Yeah, like I would like to see a Spiral 2. I keep saying, like, I don't like Spiral, but I would like to see a Spiral 2. I like those characters, and I feel like we can continue in a very interesting way. Just get away from the cop angle. I know that's going to be really hard with something like Spiral, but I don't know. It's kind of a cool idea. I don't know. Anyway, guys, I'm going to peace out now because it is 2 a.m. for me, and I have to get up and do stuff tomorrow. It has been a pleasure talking to you guys, which however little came in. I do appreciate everyone, concurrent viewers, and everyone watching now. Again, I'm going to leave this stream up for a bit, but my intention is to private it eventually and then take the main discussions here, section them up, and put them on videos on the channel. So hopefully I get that done sometime here in the next coming days, and we can do the review section, the box office discussion, and the sequels idea discussion in 3 individual videos. And hopefully the people who missed the stream will be able to fully experience everything that we got to talk about here. I intend to make this a regular thing and have discussions, a wide range of discussions from not only the Saul franchise, but everything. I still have plenty of things I want to discuss in the Saul franchise. I just wanted to do a bit of an overview, very basic overview of everything Saul 10, because guys, I'm really excited for Saul 10 being out. Obviously sit here for the last hour or so and talk about it. So again, guys, super pleasure. I really appreciate having everyone here, and I hope everyone has a really good night. I will see all of y'all out later, and it's been real.